You know what's funny? I was literally editing my video, right? And I was going through my editing and I realized, oh my gosh, I don't have an intro. Why did I do an intro? So here's my intro. Here it is. What's up? What's up, everybody? It's your girl, Christina. Welcome to my channel, DevDivaHacks. Today, we're going to talk about one of my favorite mediums to listen to is podcasts. So in this video, I'm going to talk about my top favorite podcasts. So hope you guys enjoy it. I hope you get some value for what I'm sharing with you today. And hopefully you can add these podcasts to your personal listening routine. So don't forget to like and subscribe to your girl. I appreciate the love and enjoy the video. I'm going to shut up now so y'all can continue to the video. All right, cool. So my first choice of podcast I like to listen to is called The Ground Up Show. The Ground Up Show from Matt Devale. Devale, Matt. I'm just going to call him Matt because I know I'm going to mess up his last name. But look him up, Ground Up Show. What I really like about his podcast, right? He brings in these incredible guests, brilliant-minded, motivated, just content creators. And what Matt does is that he interviews each of these creators and he just talks about how each of these creators bring their passion. He talks about the value that they bring, how they're making an impact, and he asks them about like the lessons that they learned as they're going through their journey of being a content creator or being an entrepreneur. So this is more of an interview type of show. But I promise you, like, this podcast will bring so much value to you. And my favorite part about his podcast is that it's very relatable. It's almost too relatable, almost. Like, this podcast is, like, so relatable. The topics that he talks about gets really deep. We're talking about mental health issues. You may talk about what's going on with finances, content creators, people who struggle starting their own business, and just very deep topics, food, and just all kinds of variety of topics. So the Ground Up Show is just one of those relatable podcasts you can listen to. If you need some good motivation or something to kind of get you going, this is a great podcast to listen to. Here are some of these successful stories. So I recommended the Ground Up Show. And before I continue, all these podcasts are found across all platforms. So you'll find them on Apple, iTunes, Spotify, all music platforms. You'll find these podcasts. Just want to give you that heads up. All right. My next podcast I like to listen to is called The School of Greatness by Lewis Howes. Now, this is Power Punch podcast. Honestly, this is one of the best business, productivity, self-development podcasts out there today. I honestly believe it's one of the best shows you can listen to. And what Lewis Howes does, he used to be a pro athlete, now he's a lifestyle entrepreneur. So what he does in this interview is that he brings in and interviews great people who are influential, celebrities, world-class athletes, business personnel, and just all these amazing influencers. He brings them in. He asks them questions about like their journey. He asks them about, the lessons they learned. He asks about tips and advice to kind of build our own business model and just kind of learn from the best. And I think the show is just genius because it's just like, all of us wants to be great, right? We all want to be successful and great. And with Lewis Howes, he brings in greatness and he picks the minds of the greats. And he shares that everything through this podcast. I love this podcast. I absolutely love it. So I highly recommend you add this to your podcast list. This is a must listen, Lewis Howes. I promise you, listen to his podcast for a week. Just pick 7 episodes and listen to it for a week. I promise you, your mindset is going to be forever changed. It's awesome. So, The School of Greatness, I will add that to your list. Highly recommend it. The next podcast I like to listen to. Now with this podcast, this is very specific towards people who want to be a software developer. This is a podcast for those who want to get some tips about getting a job as a software developer, project ideas, programming concepts. He talks about a little bit of soft skills, a little bit of philosophy. So this is a more of a technical podcast. This podcast is called Simple Programmer Podcast with John Sonmez. I may mess up his last name, but it's all good. And at the end of the, in the video below, in the description, I do have a list of all the podcasts. You guys can look it up on your own. Because I know I'm jacking up all their names. I apologize. So, Simple Programmer. It's what I like about his podcast, right? This is one of them podcasts. It's like nuggets. It's like golden nuggets. They're very short, very munchkin-like podcast episodes. Like, this is one of them podcasts that you can listen to. Like, let's say you're in the bathroom and you're going to take a little padumpy dump. While you're taking your padumpy dump, you can be listening to a 5-minute podcast about how you can enhance your soft skills as a developer. Very short, very sweet type of podcast. And it's very good. Like, I highly recommend this to every developer out there. John shares some valuable nuggets, valuable knowledge about, landing a job as a software developer. So, add it to your list, y'all. Add it to your list. Let's keep it moving. My next favorite podcast I like to listen to is called freeCodeCamp Podcast. Now, this is one of my favorite ones, honestly, and it touches me so much to the heart. The reason why it does, because this podcast shares a lot about other people's stories, how they went from one career and they end up becoming a software developer. And I like how they bring in all kinds of backgrounds, different backgrounds, different people who was once a lawyer, now he's a software engineer, and these are totally inspiring stories. And when I listen to these stories about how they land their first opportunity as a software developer, it just motivates me more to code more, to do more, to learn more, to enhance myself, to better myself as a software developer. So the freeCodeCamp podcast is one of my favorites to listen to. I love listening to their stories, their success stories, and what they've been through. Because it's so relatable. It's so relatable. It's going to make you want to keep, stay motivated to code. So definitely add to your list for those who are developers or they want to learn how to code or try to land their first opportunity as a software developer. This is a must add to your list. The last podcast. Now, this podcast is very technical, which I like. I like technical. Now, this podcast is specifically, again, for software developers, those who want to learn how to code. This is the podcast for you. Now, one thing I do like about this podcast, it's very technical. It talks about the nitty-gritty about software design, best practices, software architecture, coding. It talks about object-oriented programming, database design, implementation. Like, these guys go in on this podcast. I didn't even think that you can talk about this stuff so well in the podcast. Like, it's really good. Like, these guys killed it. So this podcast is called codingblock.net. codingblock.net. And I recommend every single developer out there in the world, regardless if you're brand new or you're super experienced, this is a great podcast to listen to, honestly. It's a great way to reinforce the concepts that you do know. And they also bring a lot of interesting topics too. And it's not just, some of it's technical, some of it is philosophy and theories. So it's almost like a whole computer science degree packed into this podcast. It's amazing. And one thing that I really do appreciate about this show is that how they take each topic and they break it down like layman's terms. Like, for example, right? I'm a college student and I recently took a class on data structures and algorithms. And one of the things that I used to get confused about is hash tables and dictionaries and data structures. And I always kind of struggle, like, when should I use a hash table? When is it appropriate to use dictionaries? So, of course, I've been to school and I sat through class and I read the textbook and all that. But for some reason, it didn't really click for me until codingblocks.net came through and I saw an episode about hash tables versus dictionaries. Now, once I listened to the episode, I was like, oh my gosh, it just clicked. It just clicked for me right then and there. And I was like, wow, that makes sense. That makes sense. Like, I don't know, because of the way they explain it, or maybe I just needed a different way to be explained or whatever, but I love how they broke it down, and now I have a better understanding of what hash tables and dictionaries are. And honestly, I have learned so much from this podcast. Listen, I learned so much more from this show than what I learned in college. Sorry, honestly, I gained so much more knowledge about data structures and algorithms through this podcast alone than my own college class, believe it or not. So it's powerful. Every software developer should have this on their podcast list. And I promise you guys are going to enjoy it. It's a great show. It's really long. It's 2 hours long, each show, but it's very impactful, great value, and you're going to benefit from it. So, now we get to the end of the video. My top favorite podcast. So, if I was to make a choice, right, between my favorite podcast to listen to. So, I'm going to pick my favorite technical podcast, and I'm going to pick my most favorite business / personal development podcast. So, my top favorite programming technical podcast I like to listen to is codingblocks.net. Honestly, out of the ones that I listed here, out of the 3, I will pick codingblocks.net as my favorite podcast to listen to. If I want to learn about data structures or just review on certain core topics and whatever, this is a great podcast. This is hands down my favorite one. codingblocks.net. Yes, the guys are a little corny, they're quirky, they're funny, but you know what? They bring invaluable information. So that's why I like codingblocks.net, and they're my favorite software developer podcasts. I'm telling you guys, you need to add them to your list. Now, my favorite productivity / personal self-development podcast. My favorite one is, it's tough because I like both of them so much, but I'm going to have to go with The School of Greatness. And I have to go with The School of Greatness by Lewis Howes. And the reason why I say that is because this podcast has brought so much value into my life. I'm telling you. I listened to one episode, and this is the reason, and that episode was the reason why I started my YouTube channel. It was just like, gosh, it was speaking to me. Like, this podcast brought so much value to my life. So, The School of Greatness by Lewis Howes, that's my favorite personal development and productivity podcast. And then my favorite technical one is codingblocks.net. All right, begin. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for sitting down and go through my top favorite podcasts. Go ahead and add them to your list, to your daily routine of listening. And you know what? I have it all listed down in the description below. Alright, so if you liked the video, go ahead and show your girl some love. I appreciate the love and the thumbs up. Go ahead and subscribe to my channel if you want to learn about productivity, tech, and coding. I cover all 3 with this amount of energy and passion. So go ahead and subscribe to my channel. You won't regret it. Thank you so much for watching, y'all. Until next time.